Hello, hello, and welcome. If you are new here, so am I. My name is Malin, like Melinda, but no duh, and I am a Seattle resident who enjoys reading and writing as passions and hobbies of mine, and I am here to join the online literary discourse about books that I've liked, disliked, and kind of in the middle, but not to just talk about the basic book review. I wanted to discuss the craft, the art that goes into making the books themselves, the intentions of the author, why things were written the way they were, the word choices behind everything, so anything from as small as syntax and word choice to something as big as character development and plot. I want to flesh out all of the characters and discuss what it is that makes a book good. So if that is something that interests you, then go ahead and stick around. So for today's video, what I wanted to discuss in particular is prose, and I wanted to use Sue Lynn Tan's Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which is a debut novel, as a way to kind of explore what is prose and how it can be executed well and maybe not so much. First things first, to go over what is prose. According to Studio Binder, it is a style of writing. It often does not follow a structure or a rhyme or a rhythm of meter, but instead focuses on using particular words and an order of words to evoke a certain rhythm of its own and a tone from the piece. So what that means is prose is not poetry, right? Poems often have rhymes and structured meters, while prose does not. It more closely mimics actual speech in the way that we talk to one another. It's less figurative than poetry, but not always the case, especially in fiction. But there is such a thing as poetic and lyrical prose. Those are very real things. And lyrical prose, is something that I utilize quite frequently in my own writing, sometimes to my detriment, if I'm being completely honest. But the specific words that are being used, the tone that's being evoked from the piece, all of those can be very different, very subjective to what you're using, what author is writing it, and why they're choosing what they're choosing. Sometimes lyrical prose can often be referred to as purple prose as well. And that tends to be when the prose is being overdone, bogging down the story or drawing attention away from the story itself, which is something that I tend to do, is focusing on, ooh, I want to write something so beautiful and metaphorical, and ooh, it sounds so lovely, but nothing's happening, and it doesn't matter, and it doesn't add to the story. So that's something I wanted to talk about today, using this book as an example. Now, prose influences the tone and voice of a piece, and those two things are different, right? Tone is expressed through the word choice, and it examines the author's intended mood for the piece. They would use words such as anxious or frantic in order to evoke a kind of panicked emotion from the reader, or they would use words like softly and coolly to evoke something else, right? Those are purposeful choices that the author is making. Voice, on the other hand, is a mix of tone and word choices that give each character in the story their own uniqueness. And dialogue is the most common form of doing this, and especially the easiest way to convey a character's voice because it's coming from inside the story. In ways that you can influence prose, specifically, two ways that I just wanted to talk about today are diction and syntax. Diction is word choice, the words that you are picking to put on the page. Syntax is the order of those words, because the order you place them in, the meaning can be different depending on that. And so that is very intentional and purposeful as well. And it's important to keep in mind when you're crafting a story, not just throwing random words out there, but being intentional about what's going on the page. In general, with this book, I thought it was beautiful. I rated it a 3.5 when I first read it a few months ago in my book club. It's got a very strong lead female character. She makes active choices that drive the plot through the rest of the story. She is not passive in her own tale, which is something that I'm very appreciative of from the author on this. And in several places, the prose is stunning. It's full of visual imagery. It's got big, beautiful words. It's got colors. It paints this vivid painting in your mind of what the world looks like, what the characters look like, what you feel, as if when you're standing in the celestial kingdom, you can feel what it feels like to be there. The problem that comes with this book in particular is that there's too much of this going on, and it's taking away from the story itself that's happening, because we'll be in the middle of a scene having something going on, and then all of a sudden we're discussing the intricacies of a certain character's robe and her outfit, which is beautiful, and now I know what she looks like, but it's not adding anything to the plot. It's not enhancing the character's choices or influencing them in any way. It's just taking a quick detour to go, look at this. Okay, now we need to get back to actually what's happening. And by then we're like, wait, what's happening? I was just looking at and now I have to go back and reread. And so I would find myself oftentimes being on a page just going from here to here, because I knew I wasn't going to miss anything plot-wise. I was just going to get a bunch of descriptions of what things look like, and so I would just skip so that I could get back to the things that are moving forward. And that's a problem, because I don't want to skip over the words that are in the book. I want to read the words that the author chose to put in here. But like I said, there needs to be intention with those words. Why are you describing this in this moment? Why are you using these descriptors in this moment? Those are all important things to keep in mind. And I think that in general, it is so well executed in this, but in many places it just slowed the story down, and I think she would have been served by killing her darlings, as they say, and just kind of cutting back on some of the physical descriptions of everything, because her prose otherwise, with the action that's happening and the characters and their choices, is great, and it moves things along and it keeps your attention. But then when the lull happens of, oh, I'm just getting a description of what this castle looks like, it's kind of just like, and I skipped a solid chunk of the book because they're in something called a coral palace, and it really genuinely didn't influence the plot. What happened here did not influence the ending or the character and the choices that she made. It was just a side stop. It was I don't know, it did not serve the story, and that's unfortunate that I felt the need to skip that, because she wrote it for me to read, if that makes sense. And I want to read an example from the book to kind of give y'all an idea of what I'm talking about. So specifically, I'm going to go to chapter 1, page 12. If you don't want to hear me reading through the excerpt, then you can skip forward through that. But I just want to kind of get a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about here. In this scene, the daughter of the moon goddess is hiding right now because the celestial empress has come to visit her mother, and the daughter is not supposed to exist. She shouldn't be alive, basically, and the moon goddess is kind of exiled. She's not well liked, so the empress is not a fun lady. She's the pseudo antagonist of the story. Just very briefly, they're having a dialogue. The celestial empress is asking the mother, has she been well? They're discussing each other, and now the main character is crouching down by the wall, craning her neck to peer into the room. Her mother's kneeling on the floor, her head bowed low, while across from her, seated in the mother's own chair, had to be the celestial empress. Now those words paint a very strong scene. We see the mom kneeling down, we see the empress above her, we see the power dynamic being shifted here for the first time in the story. This is an inciting incident. This is what's bringing the plot to start and make our character move forward here and leave her home. And all of a sudden we stop, and for 2 paragraphs the empress's crown is described, and the entire appearance of her assistant who's standing next to her is described. Beautifully done. Beautifully done. She was not wearing a crown, but an elaborate headdress crafted with jeweled leaves and flowers which clinked as she moved. That's all you needed. That's perfect. But she keeps going. A bud unfurled, blossoming into an amethyst orchid. Over for her fingertips, glinted pointed gold sheaths, curved into the claws of a hawk. The silver embroidery on her violet robe caught the fading light streaming through the windows. Unlike my mother's delicate, that in the middle is not necessary. Because then, unlike my mother's delicate and calm aura, hers was strong, pulsing with heat. That's it. All you needed was the first and the last sentence to describe that character and set her characterization for the reader to understand who she is, with the beautiful prose, and not sacrificing the beat and the movement and the pacing of the scene, if that makes sense. So again, I thought it's beautiful, it's lovely, it's soft, it's setting the mood, but it's throwing the pacing off throughout the story. And I think that there just needed to be more of a balance in between when and where the visual imagery and these descriptions were going. Like I said earlier, I think it would have worked best when the character is alone, thinking to herself, she's having these inner monologues, or in a scene where she's talking to her lover that's in the story. Those would be really great parts to build out the mood through the visual imagery and the world through all of that, not in the middle of when things are happening, like battles and people almost dying. So my final thoughts is, like I said, the plot line of this book is simple, it's easy to follow, it's a great main character. I've never read something with Chinese mythological lore before, so I was very interested to learn something new about a part of the world that I'm not from. The girl is banished from home. She runs away to try and win her mother's freedom, meets a handsome man along the way. They're separated, they're brought back together, they have a battle, they beat the bad guy, they get married, the end. The problem that comes from this book is that there's just too much weight in the flowery prose that's utilized, and it crosses that border into purple prose, drawing away from the story that's happening, which is a very strong and solid story that is happening up underneath all of that. So it should not be removed. The author could have just done with some trimming of the metaphorical flowers, as they say. Those are my thoughts on Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan, and just my general instruction and information on what prose is and how it can be executed one way or another. Thank you so much for sticking around if you've made it this far, and I hope to see you at the next one. Thanks. Bye.